Today on Trucks, we're going to take a 66 Ford F100 and drop its twin I-beam suspension 3 inches all the way around. Then we'll show you a Mercedes-Benz that can be deployed just about anywhere and simply can't be stopped. Don't miss a rare look at the Unimog. Finally, if you gotta have more horsepower, we're going to show you exactly where to find it. That's all today on Trucks.
Hello everybody, welcome to another week of Trucks. You know, last season we did a lowering kit on a classic Chevy and the response to that project was overwhelming. Problem was, about half of you wanted to see the same thing done to a Ford. So this week we're going to take a 66 Blue Oval and drop it 3 inches all the way around.
Now, for years there wasn't much available for Fords due to their twin I-beam suspension, but DJM changed all that with their Dream Beam kit. Now it comes with left and right replacement beams, shocks, kingpins, and tie rod extensions.
Not only are we going to drop our Ford, but while we're at it, we're also going to convert it to power front disc brakes. Now, one of the really neat things about these old Fords is you can build a really nice looking ride at minimal cost because you can get most of the parts at a salvage yard.
Now here's a great example of what we're talking about. The front disc brakes off a 74 through 79 F-Series pickup will bolt right onto our application. And by shopping around, we were able to get this whole setup for only $100. Now that's important that you don't spend too much money for these, and we'll tell you why a little later on. Also, very important to make sure you get the whole setup, including the proportioning valve, which is located down on the front cross member.
Well, now that we have our truck up on the lift and a jack in place, I can get started with the front end disassembly. First thing we need to do is pop off the brake line and cap it. Get rid of our stock shocks. Then we can knock our tie rod end loose. I'm also going to unbolt this radius arm. Make sure you hang on to it because you're going to have to reuse it later on.
With the arms unbolted, all you need to do is lower the jack to release the springs. Now keep in mind, you don't need to use a spring compressor for this application because the spring is held in place by these retaining bolts. Undo the spring retainer and take out the spring. Now unbolt the axle and pull out the whole assembly. And just repeat the process on the other side.
Now that we have everything out of here, this is a perfect time to clean everything up so we can repaint it. Now, like we said before, we are going to reuse the radius arms as well as the stock coil springs, so we have to clean those up and repaint them as well.
Now, your junkyard parts will need to be cleaned up too. Now, like I said, don't spend too much money for these because chances are you can't use half of them. Now, look at this rotor. This thing is shot. Now, the calipers will definitely need to be rebuilt or replaced, and the bearings are cheap enough, just go ahead and plan on replacing those. Now, the kingpins are notorious for seizing up inside of these spindles, so I'll need to press those out.
Now, don't just shoot paint on your dirty, rusty parts. Take the time to hit them with a wire brush to get all the debris off. This would also be a perfect time to check them for any cracks or damage. Once you have everything cleaned up and checked out, you need to shoot it with a really good epoxy paint. We use Rust-Oleum's Hammer Tone because the rough finish looks really good on cast parts.
Putting the new beams on is really easy. Just put a little grease on the bushings to keep them from squeaking, and then slide them into place.
Okay, a little bit more to me.
All right.
There we go.
It's got it. It's also important to use a stock height coil spring to keep your camber right. Now, if you try to lower a Ford by just cutting a coil spring, you'll end up with excessive negative camber, which not only looks bad, but wears the inside of your tires out quick.
It's always a good idea when you're putting your front end back together to use polyurethane bushings as opposed to the stock rubber ones because they won't deteriorate or deflect like rubber. Urethane bushings will also give you a much firmer and responsive handling truck. With the spring in place, jack up the axle and tighten down the retaining bolts.
Now we're ready for the spindles. It's amazing what a little paint and elbow grease will do, isn't it? Now DJM supplies new bushings that we pressed into the spindles, and they go right here on top of the axle. Now don't forget to put in the new thrust bearing. It goes right here on the bottom. Now you're ready for your kingpins. Make sure you grease them up real well and that the notch lines up with the hole for the lock pin. Then you can tap these guys in.
Because of our 3-inch drop, we need to put an extension on the tie rod end. Now the kit comes with this extender that bolts right onto the existing tie rod. Once you have it on, put red Loctite on the stud and torque it down to 140 foot-pounds. The only thing you need to watch here is that the extension and the spindle are flush against each other when it's all tightened down.
Now here's where you can really save some money. We got these brand new rotors at the local auto parts store for 30 bucks a pop. And these bearings and seals are $15 a side. On the calipers you have a choice. You can rebuild your old ones. These kits are about $6. Or for our application, these fully loaded calipers with the brake pads are only 29 bucks. For 29 bucks, we're not going to mess with rebuilding the old ones. It's all together.
All right. Another cheap piece of insurance are these brand new brake hoses that only cost about $10 but are worth their weight in gold when it comes time to pull in the reins. Finally, we can install the new gas shocks that come with the kit.
Hey Mel, let's get started on the other side and then we can do the rear.
Sounds good.
Before we do that, we need to take a break. Stay with us. Trucks will be back right after this.
A little bit down.
Later in the show, we'll give you a rare look at a classic from Mercedes-Benz, the Unimog. But up first, we need to finish dropping our 66 Blue Oval 3 inches all the way around. Just can't get enough of trucks? Check us out online at truckstv.com.
Welcome back to the truck shop, everybody. Now that we have a 3-inch drop and disc brakes on the front of our 66 Ford, it's time to drop things down in the rear.
To do that, DJM supplies everything you'll need, including the new front brackets, rear hangers, all the hardware, and of course brand new gas shocks.
Now the rear isn't near as involved as the front, but you will need to get a floor jack under the pumpkin so you can move the axle around once you unbolt it. Not to mention, it keeps you from having to bench press the dang thing.
Now we can start tearing things apart back here. Let's go ahead and get started with this front spring bolt. Then we can get rid of these nasty old shocks that have definitely seen their better days.
Now we come to the worst part of this project, and that's getting rid of this old spring bracket. Now, you can grind these rivets off or use an air chisel, but we strongly recommend going down and renting a plasma cutter. That'll save you about 3 hours of some really nasty labor. Now, come back in here and make sure that there's no wiring or brake lines that you can roast. Then you can melt off the heads of the rivets. After that, go ahead and knock loose the bracket. Now I know you're probably thinking, I'll just take a hammer and tap those rivets out of there. Well, they're pressed in from the factory, which means they might as well be welded in. If you don't have a plasma cutter, you're going to have to drill them out.
While Stace is trying to keep hot cherries from rolling down his shirt, I'm going to get started on these rear shackles. Now first off, if you don't have some good penetrating lube to knock these old bolts loose, you're working way harder than you have to. Once you have the shackle off, you can see DJM gives you a couple options as to how far you can drop your truck. We're going to go with this hole here because it'll give us the 3-inch drop we're after.
Now the front bracket's just like the rear shackle Mel just told you about. It's got a couple options for your ride height, and it also bolts right up to the frame in the holes where we cut out the old rivets.
Once the spring's back in place, all you have left to do back here is get the new shocks on.
Now you may have noticed that we're not messing with our drum brakes back here. Now the reason being is these stock brakes, as long as they're in good shape, are more than enough to stop you. Now, if you're using a disc and drum combination like we are, you need to make sure you have a proportioning valve, because that makes sure that most of your braking goes to the front, where it belongs.
We already have the proportioning valve we found at the salvage yard, and you can mount it down on the frame or the cross member. Now keep in mind, you will have to run new brake lines to it. Your other option, which is exactly what we're going to do, is add a power booster and master cylinder combination from Master Power Brakes that already has the proportioning valve built into it.
Now the booster is a piece of cake. Bolts right to the factory holes in the firewall. Run some new brake lines, hook up your brake pedal. Don't forget to hook up this vacuum line, and you're pretty much done. Now, unlike the brake assemblies, the power booster and the master cylinder are two pieces you do not want to get in a junkyard. Speaking of a junkyard, let's see if we can find a place to dump this.
Finally, we can show you the wheel and tire combination we're going to run on our classic Ford. Now, the Krager SS not only set the standard for a good-looking 5-spoke, but it's also very inexpensive. Wrap them up in a performance street tire like our Eagle GT2s, and you have a very nice alternative to the more expensive, larger diameter billet look.
We were able to complete this project for under $2,000. And the difference in stance, not to mention braking and drivability, definitely makes the investment worth it. Stay with us. We have more trucks for you right after this.
Later on Trucks, we'll show you what to look for when hunting down some serious horsepower. But before we do, we've got that rare look at a go-anywhere vehicle from Mercedes-Benz. For more information about trucks, check us out online at truckstv.com.
Thanks for hanging with us, everybody. You know, after World War II, Germany pretty much laid in ruin. So Mercedes-Benz decided they were going to design a vehicle that could do it all. And there's really no limit to how and where the Unimog can be deployed. Whether it's the desert, the mountains, the farm, or even the road, this is one vehicle that simply can't be stopped.
The Unimog has been in production for over 50 years. Now this unique double cab 1974 model was imported by Justin Cutler of Franklin, Tennessee. Now one of the unique features about the Mog is it's got an onboard air system to assist in the braking, like an 18-wheeler, and like a tractor, it's got PTOs front and rear, as well as front and rear hydraulic hookups for running a front-end loader or a backhoe or whatever you might need for a construction site or the farm.
Now, as you can see, there are no differential pumpkins hanging down low under the Mog. That's because they have portal axles just like a Hummer that run high and reduce down at the wheel hub. Bottom line, high centering this vehicle is virtually impossible.
You could get a Unimog with a gasoline engine, but this one's equipped with a 352 cubic inch Mercedes-Benz diesel. Of course, driving this thing is a unique experience too. It's got a 6-speed transmission, but a separate lever for reverse, so you can use up to 4 of these gears backwards. In case you haven't noticed, not a whole lot of creature comforts on this particular Mercedes.
Since this vehicle does have a diesel engine, it basically doesn't need any electrical system once it's running, which means this snorkel isn't just for show. You can actually go deeper than the driver's head. In other words, you'll lose the operator long before you'll lose the Unimog to a deep water crossing.
You would think a vehicle that stands 7.5 feet tall would be susceptible to rolling over. But the fact is, the Mog will handle up to a 42-degree side slope without tipping over.
The coolest thing about the Unimog is they're still in production. So if you ever need to pull more than 30 tons, this is probably a vehicle that should be high on your list.
If you've just got to have more horsepower, then you're in the right place, because we're going to show you exactly where to find it up next on Trucks. If you want more trucks, check us out online at truckstv.com.
Welcome back, everybody. Now, if you're anything like us, you can never have quite enough horsepower. Problem is, there's so many ways to go about it. You've got high compression, blowers, nitrous oxide, and we'll deal with all that stuff later on. Today, we're going to deal with the basics, like how to choose a machine shop, how to tell them what you gotta have, what you like to have, and what you can do without.
Now, just like a pizza parlor, a machine shop has a whole mess of choices. You can get just plain old cheese all the way to a deep dish supreme with anchovies. So the first thing you need to ask yourself is what you're going to use your motor for, how much horsepower you want to get out of it, and how much money you can spend. But above all else, you have to be honest with yourself.
Any good machine shop has got to have the equipment to clean up your parts. Ideally, they hot tank them and then magnaflux them for cracks. Now, heads are notorious for cracking through the valve seats here. Magnafluxing will point that out so you don't waste time on a piece of junk. Now, if they check out and you decide to have them rebuilt, spend the extra money and get a 3-angle valve job done.
Reusing a stock crank for a basic buildup is fairly common, but you will have to check for cracks and straightness. Then you have to have it machined for the main bearings and also for the rods. Now, most stock cranks are cast, but if you're looking to unleash some serious horsepower, better drop the extra cash for a Ford steel crank.
Now, most of the times you're going to want to replace the pistons. The connecting rods, on the other hand, can usually be reconditioned and reused without any problem. Now, when you're choosing your pistons, it's real important to stick to your guns on what the engine's going to be used for. As you can see, these stockers are dished, and that's going to give you low compression. These flat tops give you higher compression, that'll give you more horsepower. And finally, these guys with the domes are going to take your compression so high that you'll probably have to use racing gas.
A line honing the block ensures that all the mains are the exact same size and are perfectly aligned. Now, as you can see, our engine has a 4-bolt main cap, which is stronger for performance. Now, not all blocks need to be a line hone, but if the shop recommends this process, you have to do it first because all the machining steps are referenced from the mains.
Decking the block is one step that you should never skip. Now, this makes sure that the deck surface area where the heads bolt to is perfectly flat, and this will keep you from blowing head gaskets. It's also possible to pick up 8 to 10 horsepower by decking the block because it increases your compression.
Of course, we've only scratched the surface of engine building and machine work, and in the weeks to come, we'll talk about blowers, nitrous, fuel injection, and don't worry, we never leave out carburation.
After you've spent your hard-earned money on a nice set of bright-colored spark plug wires, the last thing you want to see is for them to get all greasy and grimy. Now, you can take lacquer thinner and wipe them down, but that usually does more damage than good, and there's a better way to do it. Now, I like to take a standard hand cleaner, put it on a rag, and then just wipe down the wires. As you can see, it takes the gook off the wire as well as it does your hands. And the best part is, you can do this over and over and over again and not damage the wire.
As you can see, this guy's going nowhere fast. In off-roading terms, when you get hung up on your axle or the body on a rock or obstruction, you've experienced what's known as high centering, and it's time to pull out the winch.
And now truck gear, parts, tools, and equipment for pickups and sport utilities.
If you're into showing off your shine, then you gotta have a buffing tool. This dual action electric polisher from Meguiar's will help you get a shine out of your paint job that everyone will notice. It's got a variable speed so you won't burn through the paint, and you can use a 6 or 8-inch pad that's held in place with Velcro for quick and easy changes. Put the shine to your paint with Meguiar's electric polisher for about $225.
Now, for you guys that are working on a mid-50s Ford pickup and want to get rid of that old leaf spring suspension in the rear, total cost involved has exactly what you need with this 4-bar suspension kit. Now, it comes with the front brackets, the axle brackets, the 4 bars themselves, a pannered bar and bracket, coil-over shocks, and of course a cross member. Now, these bars are available in plain steel or polished stainless like we've got. Hold on to your rear end with TCI's help for prices around $770.
Well, now that Sinister's Silverado has a 6-inch lift, getting in and out of the cab has become a much more difficult task. So to keep ourselves from pulling something, we went ahead and bolted on a tubular set of side steps from Steel Horse. They have a side step pad that reduces slipping when you're wheeling in the mud, and the matte black powder coat holds up much better against the rocks. Let Steel Horse help you in and out of the cab of your truck for about $250. That's going to do it for Truck Gear. Here's a preview of next week's show.
We'll turn our attention to the business end of Project Harry Hauler by bolting on a 4-bar suspension and extra stout rear end as we continue to get our hauler ready for the street and the strip. After that, we'll show you a dandy delivery that used to bring home the bread. Then we'll take you off-road with some tire tech. That's all next week on Trucks.
Well, that's going to do it for this week's show. We appreciate you hanging out with us.
Yeah, we look forward to trucking with you again next week.
Trucks is an RTM production.